I wasn't supposed to be on this shift, but when Commander Jacobson called in sick, I got the call. It was supposed to be a quiet night, one of those endless stretches of routine on the observation deck, the kind where you stare out into the void of space, a mixture of awe and boredom filling the hours. As an analyst on the command station, I'd long grown accustomed to the slow hum of the ship's systems, the quiet chatter of the crew members, and the gentle beeping of signals, all of it blending into a kind of background noise. But then, everything changed. It was almost imperceptible at first, a single blip, a momentary disruption in the regular flow of data. My fingers hovered over the control panel, not quite registering what I was seeing. At first I thought it was a glitch, some temporary error in the system. But as I adjusted the filters and ran the diagnostics, I realized it wasn't a malfunction. No, this was something deliberate, something sent. A distress signal. I stared at the screen, blinking, as the transmission repeated. Faint, but clear. A pulse of sound beneath the surface of space. It was a coded transmission, no mistaking that. An older signal, one that hadn't been used in decades. It took a moment for me to identify it. The signal structure was designed for long-range communications, capable of withstanding the harshest conditions in deep space. Whoever had sent this had known what they were doing. I immediately brought the signal to Commander Jacobson's attention, even though I knew he was already in bed, asleep. He was known for his no-nonsense approach to command, but this wasn't something that could wait. With a few quick taps, I rerouted the message to the central comms network. It didn't take long before the command deck came to life. I could hear the muffled conversations of officers as they shuffled to their stations, the command crew suddenly alert. I felt a chill. Something about the signal gnawed at me. It wasn't just the urgency that disturbed me, it was where it was coming from. The coordinates had been scrambled, but they were not random. They pointed directly toward the Zeta Expanse. The Zeta Expanse was not a place anyone dared to go. It was a region of space on the edge of the known universe, an uncharted, dangerous void, filled with ancient ruins and the scattered remains of forgotten civilizations. There were stories, hushed voices in corridors, warnings from veteran officers that the Expanse was a graveyard of lost fleets. No human ships had ventured into its depths for centuries. And now, this signal, this cry for help, was coming from there. I couldn't help but feel the weight of it. Whoever sent this message was in trouble, and in a way, that was even more terrifying than the signal itself. Whoever they were, they had no one else to turn to. The Zeta Expanse was vast, inhospitable. It was the place where hope went to die. The comms officer, Lieutenant Davis, appeared at my side. "Do we respond?" she asked, her voice low, almost reverent, like she didn't want to hear the answer. I didn't need to say anything. We both knew the answer. This wasn't just a signal. It was a summons, a call for help that we could never ignore. We had to act. We had no choice. The question wasn't whether to answer the call, but how quickly we could mobilize. Time was slipping away, and something told me we were already too late. By the time I relayed the distress signal to command, the atmosphere on the ship had shifted. What had started as a quiet, routine evening had quickly morphed into something far more ominous. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me as I stood by the central terminal, watching the display screens flicker with new information. The initial shock of receiving the signal had worn off, replaced by the cold clarity of necessity. We had no choice but to act, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. Commander Jacobson's voice crackled over the comms, calm yet authoritative. "I want a full analysis of that signal now. Get me all the data you can. I don't care how, just do it." I nodded quickly, already getting to work. There was a buzz of frantic energy around the command deck as the crew scrambled to piece together whatever they could. The situation was too volatile to let emotions cloud judgment. No one was willing to admit it, but we all knew the Zeta Expanse was dangerous. Too dangerous. Yet the signal, that cry for help, had come from there. And that meant we had to do what no one wanted to do. We had to go in. While the analysts worked, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. The Zeta Expanse wasn't just any uncharted region. It was a place filled with mystery, yes, but also with an undeniable sense of foreboding. Its origins were unknown, and so many had tried and failed to unlock its secrets. Ancient ruins of a long-extinct species were scattered throughout the region, and some of those ruins had a dark reputation. There were rumors, whispers of strange technologies that humans had unearthed in the past. Technologies that seemed to have a mind of their own. And even more troubling, there were stories of entire fleets that had disappeared without a trace, swallowed up by the Expanse's vast, endless void. Yet, the signal hadn't been some random distress beacon. It was a cry for help, a plea for salvation, and it wasn't the sort of thing we could simply ignore. I watched the bridge crew working their stations, their faces set in hard lines of concentration, but I could see the tension in their eyes. Even Lieutenant Davis, usually unflappable, seemed rattled. The realization was slowly sinking in for all of us. Something was out there, something that had been waiting for us. And now we were heading straight toward it. "We've isolated the signal," Davis reported, her fingers dancing across her console. "It's been repeating every 15 minutes, but there's something odd about the transmission. It's encrypted, but not in a way we've ever seen. Some kind of hybrid technology, maybe?" I frowned, stepping closer. This wasn't just a simple distress signal. Whoever, or whatever, had sent it was technologically advanced. The encryption was unlike anything we had encountered before, and the complexity of it raised more questions than answers. "Keep working on it," Jacobson ordered, "and get me a full fleet readiness report. We're mobilizing and we're doing it now." I knew what that meant. The Vanguard Legion, the Earth's most dangerous fleet, was our only option. There wasn't time for reinforcements or backup. It was all or nothing. Jacobson was already making preparations to contact Fleet Command, but I could see the concern in his eyes. This was no simple rescue mission. This was something else, something bigger. The Zeta Expanse had claimed too many before us. Would we be next? I turned back to the screens, watching as our ship's sensors zoomed in on the coordinates. There was nothing to be seen yet, just the endless black of space. But I knew it wouldn't be long before we found out what was waiting for us. The fleet would be ready. I just hoped it would be enough. The fleet was a sight to behold as it ascended from Earth's orbit, its massive ships breaking through the atmosphere with a deafening roar. Even from the observation deck, I could feel the pressure in the air shift, the weight of 1,000 expectations bearing down on us. These weren't just any ships. These were the Vanguard Legion, humanity's finest, our last line of defense against the unknown. And now, our hope in answering a distress signal from a place no one dared to venture. I stood with my eyes fixed on the viewports, watching the formation of ships as they pierced the atmosphere, their sleek hulls gleaming under the harsh sunlight. 10 warships, each one more advanced than the last, each one an amalgamation of human ingenuity and military might. The Elysium, flagship of the fleet, led the formation. The ship was a masterpiece. Nearly a kilometer in length, its dark hull etched with countless battle scars from past campaigns. It had seen more battles than any other vessel in Earth's fleet, and its commander, Admiral Lucius Gray, had built a reputation that was both feared and respected across the stars. As the fleet broke free of Earth's gravity well, the vastness of space stretched out before us, a cold, dark expanse filled with unknowns. The Zeta Expanse wasn't just far from home. It was practically at the edge of known space, a region where even the most advanced starships could lose their way. The coordinates we had received were still scrambled, the signal barely stronger than a whisper through the void. Yet we knew we had to go. We had no choice. We had no other place to turn. Admiral Gray's voice crackled over the comms, commanding and calm. "Prepare for jump. Helm, engage the temporal drive on my mark. No mistakes. We don't know what's out there, but we will find it." I felt the vibrations run through the ship as the engines powered up, the energy humming beneath my feet. The temporal drives, designed to fold space itself, would bring us to the Zeta Expanse in a matter of hours rather than the days or weeks it would take using conventional propulsion. But even with this technological marvel at our disposal, there was an uneasy sense of vulnerability. We were heading into the unknown, and we didn't know what awaited us. I was pulled from my thoughts as Lieutenant Davis approached, her eyes sharp and focused. "We've decoded part of the signal," she reported. "It's definitely human, but it's older than we thought. This distress signal was sent over 100 years ago. Whoever sent it, they've been waiting a long time." I blinked in surprise. Over a century? That didn't make sense. The Zeta Expanse had been considered a dead zone for ages, a region abandoned by every major spacefaring race. Why, then, would someone send out a distress call, only to be left stranded for so long? The silence on the bridge was deafening for a moment. Jacobson was staring at the data streaming across his screen, his face grim. A century? That changes everything. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. If the signal had been sent so long ago, that meant whoever was behind it might be long gone. Perhaps the message was a ghost, a plea from a dead civilization, or an abandoned outpost, something the universe had long forgotten. The possibility gnawed at my mind. But that wasn't the worst part. What if there was something else out there? Something that had been waiting, watching for all this time? What if we weren't the ones answering the call at all? "Status report," Jacobson snapped, cutting through the tension. "Fleet is ready for jump, sir," came the reply. "Temporal drive engaged, all systems green." I turned my gaze back to the viewport, watching as the final preparations were made. My hands gripped the edge of the console in front of me, trying to quell the knot of unease in my stomach. I didn't know what we were about to find, but something in the pit of my stomach told me it wasn't going to be a rescue mission. It was going to be a reckoning. "On my mark," Admiral Gray's voice rang out over the comms, sharp and decisive. The fleet was ready. The jump was imminent. The Zeta Expanse was waiting. And whatever had sent that signal would soon know we were coming. The jump to the Zeta Expanse was smoother than expected, though the eerie stillness of space immediately surrounding us felt unnatural. As we dropped out of faster-than-light travel, I could see the vastness of the expanse before us. A pitch-black canvas broken only by distant, faint stars. But even that didn't feel reassuring. It felt like something was watching us, like the very void was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The fleet came to a halt, its massive ships holding position as the sensors began scanning the area. I could feel the tension on the bridge, the sharp edge of anticipation hanging in the air. No one spoke. The only sounds were the beeps and clicks of the consoles, the low hum of the ship's systems. My fingers moved automatically across the control panel, adjusting the settings, trying to keep my nerves steady. Whatever had brought us here, whatever had sent that signal, we were about to find out. Lieutenant Davis's voice broke the silence. "We're detecting a debris field, sir. Large fragments. It looks like an ancient battle site, something catastrophic." I didn't have to ask what she meant. The Zeta Expanse was known for its ancient ruins, the remains of long-dead species and the wreckage of long-lost ships. But this was something else. We'd been expecting an outpost, maybe an abandoned research station. But this debris field suggested something far darker. A battle, perhaps. A fight for survival, one that had been lost. "Set course for the source of the signal." Admiral Gray's voice was calm but firm, betraying no hint of the unease I could feel spreading through the ship. "Stay alert." There's no telling what we'll find in this graveyard. As we moved toward the center of the debris field, the wreckage grew thicker. Fragments of ships scattered in every direction, some twisted beyond recognition, others still showing the burn marks of weapons fire. The sight sent a chill through me. I knew these were not human ships. There was something different about them, something alien. The designs were unfamiliar, bizarre even, and I could feel the weight of their history, the unspoken tales of death and destruction embedded in their twisted metal frames. The closer we got to the source of the signal, the more I felt a nagging sense of dread building in my chest. Every instinct screamed that something wasn't right. No one spoke. We all felt it. The tension, the strange quiet that settled over us as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The deep silence of space seemed even more oppressive now, and I couldn't help but glance over at Davis, who was staring intently at her screen, her face pale. "We've isolated the signal," Davis said, breaking the silence. "It's coming from a nearby station. What's left of it anyway. It's still transmitting. There's something strange about the transmission. It's almost as if it's trying to communicate with us." I turned to face her, a frown crossing my face. "Trying to communicate? But it's a distress signal." "Yeah," she replied. But there's something encoded in it. Something more than just a cry for help. It's evolving, changing. It's not like anything I've ever seen." I couldn't explain why, but her words sent a fresh wave of unease through me. The signal was evolving? That didn't make sense. Distress signals were simple, automated. They didn't change. They didn't adapt. But here we were, heading toward the source of this one, and I could feel that something was wrong. Very wrong. Admiral Gray's voice interrupted my thoughts. "Prepare to board the station. We need to know what happened here and why that signal hasn't stopped. I don't want any surprises. Davis, I want a full analysis of that transmission. Now." The ship's engines hummed as we moved closer, the final approach to the ruined station ahead of us. The remains of a structure loomed out of the darkness, a half-destroyed research station, its exterior battered, its hull cracked open like a wound. It looked ancient, its design unfamiliar, yet human-made, and the signal came from within, still pulsing, still echoing across the cold void. I swallowed hard, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. We were about to step into the heart of a mystery that had been waiting for us for a century. The Zeta Expanse had been silent for so long, but now it was waking up. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been waiting here, whatever had sent that signal, was not happy to see us. As the boarding team prepared to disembark, the air on the bridge felt thick, heavy with the anticipation of what we might find. The crew moved with purpose, but there was an underlying tension that was hard to ignore. No one knew what to expect from the station. Everything was so eerily quiet, the debris scattered around it like forgotten tombstones in the void. Yet the signal kept pulsing, a constant reminder that something or someone was still out there. I watched the station through the viewport as the Elysium slowly maneuvered into position, its hull groaning under the pressure of deceleration. The station's silhouette loomed larger, its jagged, broken edges sticking out like the bones of a long-dead creature. Despite the silence, it felt alive in a way, like something was watching us, waiting. The comms officer, Lieutenant Harris, turned toward us with a grim expression. "We're locked on to the docking bay, preparing to deploy the boarding team," Bowers said. Admiral Gray's voice came over the comms, sharp and clear. "No surprises. We're not here for a salvage mission. Find out what happened to the crew, secure the signal, and report back. We'll be right behind you." I was already securing my own equipment. There was no need to speak further. Everyone understood the gravity of the situation. Whatever had caused the destruction around the station, whatever was responsible for this transmission, It wasn't something we were prepared for. But we were here, and there was no turning back. The silence on the bridge was deafening as the doors to the airlock sealed with a hiss, and I felt the cold bite of the air inside my helmet. The moment the outer doors opened, I could smell the decay, the stale, lifeless air of a place long abandoned, a smell that clung to the walls, to the dimly lit corridors. The station was a ghost ship, its lights flickering weakly in the darkness. The entire structure was a wreck, the corridors strewn with debris. Power surges ran through the system, and I could feel the faint hum of energy beneath my feet. We moved in tight formation, our boots echoing through the narrow hallways, each step a reminder that we were intruders in a forgotten world. The further we ventured, the more it became clear that something had gone terribly wrong here. There were no signs of life, no bodies, but the remnants of what had been once inhabited were everywhere. Broken consoles, overturned chairs, smashed glass panels. The place had been ransacked. But by who and why? "Over here," Lieutenant Davis called, her voice distorted by the comm system, but the urgency clear. She was standing in front of a large doorway, cracked open just enough to reveal the darkened interior beyond. The room was intact, almost untouched, except for one thing: the central terminal. It was still running, the screen flickering with lines of code that made no sense to me. But the pulse of the signal was unmistakable. Davis moved closer, her hands moving rapidly over the console, trying to decipher the encrypted message. "This is it. The signal source is right here. Whatever's been transmitting it, it's still active." I watched her work, but my attention was pulled elsewhere. Something about the room didn't sit right. I could feel it, a sensation that crawled under my skin, like we were being watched. I turned, scanning the shadows of the room. Nothing, but it didn't feel empty. Then I saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible movement in the corner of the room, just beyond the threshold. A shadow that shouldn't have been there. My heart skipped a beat. "Davis, get away from the terminal," I warned, my voice rising in pitch, but it was too late. The moment the words left my mouth, the lights flickered violently, then cut out completely. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the dim glow of the terminal to illuminate our surroundings. I reached for my sidearm instinctively, the cold metal a brief comfort in the chaos. Something shifted in the darkness, too fast, too silent. And then the transmission changed. The signal wasn't just a distress call anymore. It was something else, something alive. "Get back!" I shouted as I grabbed Davis by the arm, pulling her away from the console. But as I did, the walls seemed to groan in protest, and the air turned icy cold. The door slammed shut behind us with a violent force. We were trapped. "What the hell is happening?" I gasped, heart pounding. It wasn't just a broken station. This wasn't just a transmission gone wrong. Something had been waiting for us, something that had been dormant, perhaps for centuries, and now it had awakened. And I feared we might have just triggered it. Panic set in quickly as the door sealed behind us, the heavy metallic thud echoing in the now silent hallway. My breath quickened, and I felt the sweat beat on my forehead despite the cold. The flickering terminal screen was the only light, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. It seemed to pulse in rhythm with the signal, now sharp and invasive, as if it was alive. And then there was the noise. A soft, mechanical scraping sound that grew louder, as though something was moving in the depths of the station, closing in on us. "Lieutenant Davis," I barked, my voice frantic. "What's going on with the terminal? What did you do?" Davis was still at the console, her fingers flying over the keyboard in a desperate attempt to regain control. But the screen only flashed with more unintelligible code, growing increasingly erratic with each keystroke. It was clear now, the terminal wasn't just malfunctioning. It was responding to something, or worse, trying to communicate. She paused, her face pale in the dim light, and looked up at me. It's not just a signal," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This isn't a distress call anymore. It's like it's trying to synchronize with us. Whatever it is, it's adapting, learning." I froze, the weight of her words sinking in. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. If this station had been transmitting for over 100 years, what could be left behind that was capable of adapting, learning? The thought made my stomach churn. A sudden crash from behind us broke my train of thought. We spun around, our weapons drawn, hearts pounding in our chests. The hallway was dark, but we could hear the unmistakable sounds of something large and heavy moving. It wasn't human, that much was certain. The shuffling steps, the guttural, rasping breaths that echoed down the hall, it was as though whatever was out there had been waiting for us to trigger something. "Stay close," I whispered to Davis, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the nearest junction. We had to find the others, regroup. We couldn't face this alone. The station felt like a labyrinth. The once straight corridors now twisted and warped, as if the place itself had begun to distort in response to the signal. The walls seemed to close in around us, the hum of the station's failing systems growing louder as we moved. The overhead lights flickered, casting fleeting glimpses of movement in the periphery of our vision. Every shadow seemed to shift and twitch, and every creak of the station's structure felt like it was pushing us closer to something we weren't ready to confront. "Commander, we need to get out of here," Davis said urgently, her eyes wide with panic. "Whatever we triggered, it's not just a signal. This whole station is reacting to us. We're not alone." Her words barely left her mouth when a figure stepped out from the darkness ahead of us. It was tall, humanoid in shape, but wrong. Its movements jerky and unnatural, its skin a sickly gray. Its face, or what should have been a face, was little more than a mass of gnarled, shifting shapes. A grotesque parody of something that had once been human. It opened its mouth, a dry, rasping noise escaping from deep within its throat. Then it spoke, helpless. The words were disjointed, broken, as if the creature was struggling to form them. But the signal was somehow tied to it. Whatever had been left here, whatever had been waiting for centuries, it was no longer just an inanimate transmitter. The message was alive, and it was reaching out to us. Before I could react, the creature lunged. My sidearm fired instinctively, but the creature dodged with inhuman speed, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. I stumbled back, grabbing Davis and pulling her to the side as the thing reached out, its clawed fingers grazing the air inches from my face. We were outmatched, outnumbered, and out of time. "Commander, we need backup!" I screamed into my comm unit, my voice trembling. The response was static at first, and then, finally, a garbled voice came through, distorted and hard to understand. But the signal was cutting in and out, growing weaker the more the creature moved. The entire station seemed to hum, a low vibrating noise resonating in the bones of our bodies. The creature's eyes, if you could call them eyes, seemed to glow faintly, filled with an intelligence that was anything but human. It wasn't just trying to survive. It was feeding on something, and it was using us to do it. The transmission was no longer just a plea for help. It was a call to arms, and it was clear now. We were the prey. The creature's form blurred in the dim light as it surged toward us, its limbs twisting unnaturally as though they weren't bound by the laws of biology. I could feel its malevolent presence in every fiber of my being, a primal terror seizing my chest as I realized we were not facing an isolated incident, but something far more insidious. It was as if the station itself was alive, its every creak and groan a reminder that it was watching us, responding to us. The transmission wasn't just a call for help. It was a signal to awaken something ancient, something far more dangerous than we could have ever anticipated. I fired again, the pulse of my sidearm lighting up the shadowy hallway, but the creature was already gone, melting into the darkness like a wraith. Its movements were too fast, too unpredictable. Every shot missed. My heart raced, my breath shallow in the weight of the cold silence that followed. For a moment, it felt like we were alone again, but I knew better than to believe the stillness would last. "Get moving," I hissed to Davis, pulling her along by her arm. We had to find the others, our team, the fleet, someone. We couldn't let the creature isolate us. I could feel the tremors in my hands, but I forced them to steady, focusing on the task at hand. "We need to regroup, now." We rushed down the corridor, the once familiar layout of the station now foreign, twisting in on itself like a maze. The walls were pulsating faintly, as though they too were alive with energy. The air had grown colder, and the quiet had deepened to an almost suffocating level. Every step echoed too loudly in the silence, and each creak of the station's hull seemed to carry 100 unanswered questions. Ahead of us there was movement. A figure emerged from the darkness, one of the other members of our team. I exhaled in relief, but that relief was short-lived. The man's face was ashen, his uniform torn, and his eyes wide with terror. "Captain," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. You don't know what you've unleashed." "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my attempts to stay calm. "Where is everyone else?" "They're all gone," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "The crew, no one survived. They were taken, absorbed. This thing, whatever it is, it's not just one creature. It's a whole collective. The station, it's connected to it. I don't even know what's real anymore. It's using us. It's using me." I felt my blood run cold as his words sank in. This wasn't just a single entity. The signal we had followed here wasn't a cry for help. It was a baited trap. The creature was part of a larger, more insidious whole, a parasitic intelligence that had been using the station and its inhabitants as vessels, manipulating them, feeding off them. This wasn't a simple alien encounter. It was something far worse. The creature was a manifestation of the expanse itself. Before I could respond, the lights flickered violently again, plunging the station into an even deeper darkness. The hum of the station intensified, the vibrations underneath our feet becoming a dull roar, as if the very structure was coming to life, shifting and stretching. Something was closing in, and we were running out of time. "Move," I ordered, shoving the captain ahead of me. "Get to the docking bay. We need to get back to the fleet." But it was too late. The walls seemed to pulse around us, and before we could even react, we were surrounded. Figures began to appear from the shadows, those twisted, malformed shapes, each one moving with a speed and coordination that was inhuman. They were everywhere, advancing on us from all sides, their broken forms writhing and twitching, their hollow eyes glowing with an unnatural light. I aimed my weapon, but the first shot barely slowed them down. They were too fast, too numerous. The collective was upon us, and the full extent of its power was now terrifyingly clear. In that moment I understood. The expanse wasn't just a void. It was a living, breathing entity, a predator, and we were its prey. I turned to Davis, her face pale but resolute, and made the decision that I knew was our only chance. "We can't fight it. We need to get back to the Elysium. We have to warn them. Now." But before we could take a single step toward the docking bay, the floor beneath us groaned, and the station itself seemed to shift. The walls closed in, the creature's mass pressing against us from every side. The darkness deepened, and I could hear the transmission again. Its message, no longer a plea for help, but a demand. Help us become you. In that instant, I realized the full horror of what had happened. The station wasn't abandoned. It had been waiting, waiting for someone to answer its call, and now that we had, it wouldn't let us go. As the creatures closed in, their grotesque forms melting into the shadows, I could only hope the fleet wasn't far behind.